Welcome to Echoes of Battle. In this video, we will be covering the Battle at Midway, the turning point in the Pacific. Thank you for watching and enjoy.
Following the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, Japan rapidly modernized its military and industrialized its economy. But this rapid expansion exposed a glaring weakness. Unlike the United States or European powers, Japan possessed virtually zero domestic natural resources to fuel its new empire. This chart outlines Japan's oil consumption against its domestic production leading into 1941. You can see a massive 80% deficit. That gap was supplied entirely by the United States. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze Japanese assets and imposed an oil embargo in July of 1941, it threatened to permanently paralyze the Japanese military and industrial machine. Facing economic collapse, the commander of the combined fleet, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, proposed a high-risk solution. He planned to deliver a crippling surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. This would buy Japan the time it needed to conquer oil-rich territories in Southeast Asia before America could fully mobilize its military. On the morning of December 7, 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers launched over 350 planes at Pearl Harbor. The ambush killed over 2,400 Americans, severely damaged the U.S. battleship fleet, and officially dragged the United States into World War II. By attacking Hawaii, Japan secured its short-term resource needs, but started a dangerous timer. They now had to establish an impenetrable defensive perimeter across the Pacific before American factories could mount a full-scale retaliation. Just months later, in April 1942, 16 American bombers launched from an aircraft carrier and struck Tokyo. The Doolittle raid did very little physical damage, but it deeply embarrassed the Japanese military. Yamamoto realized his defensive perimeter was already compromised. He decided to plan another elaborate ambush at Midway Atoll to draw out and destroy America's remaining aircraft carriers. But the United States possessed a massive hidden advantage. Working out of a windowless basement in Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his Combat Intelligence Unit had successfully deciphered much of the Japanese naval code, known as JN-25. The cryptanalysts repeatedly intercepted orders regarding an upcoming attack on a target called AF. Suspecting AF meant Midway, American forces sent an unencrypted radio message claiming the island's water purification system had broken down. Shortly after, a decoded Japanese message reported that target AF was short of water. The ruse worked perfectly. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now knew the exact date, size, and location of the incoming Japanese attack. He quickly positioned his own carriers miles off the coast of Midway, waiting just out of sight. Yamamoto sailed toward Midway, believing he held the absolute element of surprise. Instead, he was walking his fleet directly into a fully prepared ambush. Before dawn on June 4, 1942, Japanese aircraft descended on Midway Island. They bombed hangars, runways, and power plants, but after 27 minutes of heavy attacks, the American base remained operational. At 7:05 a.m., Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumbo received a radio report from his returning pilots. They told him the first wave wasn't enough, and a second aerial strike was required to finish off the island's defenses. Nagumo had a reserve force of planes sitting on his aircraft carriers, armed with anti-ship torpedoes just in case American naval vessels appeared. Relying on Yamamoto's assumption that the ocean was clear of American ships, Nagumo ordered his crews to disarm the torpedoes and swap them out for ground bombs. This single order triggered chaos in the carrier hangars. Mechanics frantically rushed to swap out heavy ordnance, leaving fuel hoses, loose munitions, and tightly packed aircraft crowding the decks. Then, a Japanese scout plane broke radio silence. It had spotted American ships off the coast of Midway. Stunned by this sudden intelligence, Nagumo desperately reversed his order, commanding his exhausted deck crews to stop arming bombs and rapidly switch the planes back to torpedoes. This hour of frantic, contradictory orders stripped the Japanese fleet of its ability to launch a coordinated attack. Their ships were paralyzed, functioning as floating powder kegs loaded with highly explosive fuel and unsecured bombs. The Americans struck first. Torpedo bomber squadrons launched from the U.S. carriers approached the Japanese fleet low over the water. Flying unescorted by fighter planes, nearly every American torpedo bomber was shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire and Zero fighters. But look at what this 3D visualization shows about the airspace above the battle. To chase down the American torpedo planes, the entire Japanese fighter defense descended to sea level. This completely cleared the high-altitude airspace, leaving a wide-open vertical corridor directly above the aircraft carriers. At the exact same time, high above the clouds, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey was leading a squadron of American dive bombers. Arriving at his assigned coordinates, he found empty ocean. Running dangerously low on fuel, he acted purely on instinct and banked his squadron northwest to hunt for the enemy fleet. At 10:22 a.m., McCluskey's bombers arrived perfectly positioned in that undefended, high-altitude corridor. Below them sat the Japanese carriers, their fighter defenses out of position, and their wooden decks still packed with exposed fuel and heavy bombs. The American dive bombers dropped out of the sky. In less than 6 minutes, they scored fatal hits on the Akavi, the Kaga, and the Soryu. The bombs ignited the exposed munitions on the decks, tearing the massive ships apart in rapid chain reactions. The only remaining Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, managed to launch a counterattack that severely damaged and eventually sank the USS Yorktown. But American dive bombers located the Hiryu later that afternoon, scoring direct hits that left it burning beyond repair. By nightfall, Japan's elite carrier strike force had been completely wiped out. The loss of 4 fleet carriers was compounded by a catastrophic human toll. Japan lost 3,000 personnel, including the elite veteran pilots, mechanics, and flight deck crews who had powered their early victories. The Imperial Japanese Navy relied on rigid, slow-moving training pipelines and suffered from severe resource shortages. Because of this, replacing those elite personnel and constructing new fleet carriers was mathematically impossible. By contrast, the United States possessed staggering industrial capacity. Within months of the battle, American shipyards were already launching new Essex-class aircraft carriers, while factories assembled thousands of planes and produced millions of tons of military supplies. By erasing Japan's offensive naval advantage in a single afternoon, the conflict shifted from a war of tactical surprise to a war of sheer industrial attrition, a war Japan simply did not have the resources to fight. With the strategic momentum firmly in hand, the Allies began a relentless island-hopping campaign. They systematically captured vital airstrips and supply bases while bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions, steadily marching their forces across the Pacific Ocean. Over the next 3 years, American forces captured islands like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. By 1945, the Japanese Navy was largely destroyed, and American bombers were striking Japanese home cities on a daily basis. Facing intense daily bombing, the dropping of 2 atomic bombs, and a Soviet declaration of war, Japan formally surrendered on September 2, 1945, bringing World War II to an end. Throughout the battle, the massive fleet of battleships Yamamoto brought to Midway never fired a single shot at an American ship. By deciding the outcome entirely through carrier-based air power from over the horizon, the United States ended Japanese offensive expansion and seized a strategic initiative they would hold until the end of the war.